I'm going to start with basics and go up on the demonstration. I want to do a little bit of talking about the tools and some of the work I've done. There's a lot of ways to do embellishing on pieces. Even a small bead or a small cove is an embellishment. A burned line is an embellishment. It all works. I've done a lot of different things. This piece here is oak. All it is turned into a goblet and then hit with a torch on the outside to highlight the grain. I hope to show that. This is a piece of cottonwood. It is carved on the bottom. It is burned. It is soft. It is stringy. It is everything you said it is, and I've enjoyed working with it. Sanding sealer is your friend. This piece here is wood burned. The dots are made with a Dremel, with an old stone, and it's just pushed in and burned in the pattern. And then these little lines here are done with a wood burner. And this little bit on the bottom was made to hide some bad tear out. You can use wood burning as an embellishment to fix things like that. I do a lot of box elder pieces with natural edge. The bark doesn't stay on most of the time. So like you can see here, there's a piece that's come off from it being in my box. There's a section here where I wood burned it, and it's not noticeably different from the bark. It just looks like a piece of the bark. It's a good way to, it's an embellishment, and it's a good way to fix something like that to make the piece look consistent. I've had pieces where all the barks come off, and I've just wood burned the natural edge, either with a torch, handheld butane torch, Home Depot, Amazon, or with the wood burner. This piece here is combined with several different techniques. I first got into wood turning because I have a Celtic art obsession. So every so often I will feed that obsession and do more Celtic art. But that's the impetus that got me into wood turning to begin with. So the Celtic knot design is burned, then it's airbrushed, and then the metallic silver is painted on top of it. This groove here is done on the lathe, and the wood burning is being done with an acrylic sampler that I got at Home Depot or someplace like that. These are free. Don't take them all. You don't need a lot of them, but basically you spin the lathe, you create a groove, and you just push this in with the lathe turned up, and it'll burn a line for you. I'll show that. You can do the same thing. This is a piece of this is picture hanging wire. These handles are scrap, 2x4 from my shop. Turn handles, use handles. If you're using picture hanging wire or guitar string to burn lines and things, do not wrap it around your finger. If the lathe grabs the wire while you're doing it, it'll strip your finger to the bone. Don't do that. This piece here combines a lot of different techniques. This is based on Nick Agar's Viking Sunset Bowls. I learned how to do these at a class with Nick. If you get a chance to take a hands-on class with Nick, it's worth every dime and every minute you spend. The piece on the back has a number of different techniques. It uses this Wagner knurling or texturing tool. It uses the Henry Taylor decorating elf. It uses the Sorby spiraling tool. So the spiraling tool is here, the knurling tool is here, the decorating elf is here, there's the spiraling tool again. These are carved with spear bits using a Dremel. You just basically create the design yourself. These are burned, or maybe hole punched and then burned. And some of it is wood burned. The coloring is created with an airbrush. I'm not an expert on airbrush. I'm middle of the road. But these are techniques that I'm doing with airbrushing anybody can do with just a little bit of practice. And the metallic silver on the outside is done with a gilding paste like this. In fact, this is probably what I did it with. They also sell Rub and Buff, which does the same sort of thing. Hobby stores. This piece here is turned, then painted with black gesso. Black gesso you can buy at any art store. It's a fairly thick base coat, and then the design is then carved out. How I created this design was I had a French curve in my tool chest that I had with me at the time, and I just basically used a watercolor pencil on top of the paint to draw out the design, and then I went over it with the Dremel to carve it out with a diamond bit. It didn't take as long as you might think. Let's see. This piece here is airbrushed. This is Spalted Birch, and I wanted to try to see if I could get an effect where it looked like it was in shadow all the time. So it's yellow, and then some red, and a little bit of blue, and then black at the bottom. These pieces here, if you want to talk about the manta ray bowls, I'm happy to talk about that on break. This piece is black lacquered, and then there's a paint that it looks a lot like the string paint. They call it a marbleizing paint. Krylon makes a marbleizing paint. Chromacolor makes a paint that's similar to it. You basically just sit back and spray it on in the design you want. I left a tenon on so that I could put it back on the lathe and turn it clean after I've done all the painting. That's done in a lot of instances. That's how this piece is done. You leave the tenon on, and after you've done with all the painting, then you come back and put the groove in through the paint and turn the center bowl out. This piece is wood burned. I carved the texture with I carved it with a spear bit, a small spear bit, and then I went over it with the wood burner. I was covering tear out on the back of this, as I remember also, people. The top of this, I wanted to try to get a sort of a hammered metal look. So this is sort of textured with a spear bit using a Dremel, then black lacquer, and then dry brushed with gold metallic paint. And dry brushing is a pretty simple technique. You get load a little bit of paint on the brush, and then you wipe it till it's on like a paper towel until it's dry, and then you just very gently hit the tops of things with it. This piece here, I also hope to show this technique today. This is carved and textured, and then stained black, or stained red first, and then with the black gesso over top, and then you go over it with a Scotch-Brite pad, sanding pad, to remove some of the black on top. This piece here, this piece has gone through about 3 or 4 different versions of it. The dots were spaced out using, there's a guy by the name of Mike Walt, W-A-L-D-T. He's a British Scotch Welsh turner. His accent is hard to decipher sometimes. He has a little device he made. If you look on his YouTube channel, he's got a device he made that goes into your banjo, and it uses a drill guide. Do you guys know what a drill guide is? It's a couple of little inserts, and you stick a drill bit through it. Well, it also fits Forstner bits. So what you do is you put this little wood piece you made on your banjo, you put the little drill bit insert into it, and you put the Forstner bit through it, and then you use your lathe indexer to precisely center your holes and precisely order your holes around. And you can, I was just experimenting with this, but you can do this with any size drill bit, any size Forstner bit, and you don't have to, I was just playing with 6, but you could put 30 of them all around, or 36 of them, or whatever your lathe indexer lets you put around. But it's it takes an hour to make this thing or less in your shop. The drill guide set is $15, and it greatly augments any sort of hole placement you want to do in your pieces. So let's say you were inserting wood dowels into a piece. You could use that technique to precisely space them around your pieces. This plate is done with stencils. Again, I'm not an expert on airbrushing, so I cheat. I use stencils. The leaf veining is done with vein stencils that I painstakingly cut out myself. I reuse them. I've got 2 different sizes. I have both the veins and the holes they came out of. I used both sides. This is a piece of Bradford pear. I had an opportunity to cut some Bradford pear down because it was getting Bradford pears all over our cars in the driveway. So I've got a lot of it. If you leave it sitting out, it spalts like this. That's how you create a groove, a burn groove on your piece. It's that simple. This is a specialized tool. It's basically a round piece of steel, grounded at an angle. It lets you cut a cove fairly easily. But you could do it with any of your other tools. You could do it with your standard deep-fluted bowl gouge. You could do it with a skew. You could do it with anything, the spindle gouges. The decorating elf works well inside a cove like this. Now, one of the things that you can do with these tools, the spiraling tools, is you can rotate them while they're moving. So you can move them along the piece and rotate them to change the texture you're building in it. So basically what you do, you want to make sure that you leave enough room for the wheel or whatever device is on it to move, and then you put the piece, the tool in the piece, and create the texture. That has created this spiral texture here. Hopefully you can see that. So it's created a spiraling texture like this. That's the Henry Taylor decorating elf. So I moved the tool a little bit. I rotated it a little bit while I was in the groove to extend that a bit. Now, a lot of these tools will let you do things like re-index them. If you decide that you've put a texture on and you want to extend that texture, the tool will re-engage the grooves and allow you to extend it. So I don't know if I can actually do that, but let's. So I added it outside of the groove and was able to recreate to extend that texture by allowing the tool to re-index itself on the already existing grooves that have been created. This is the Sorby spiraling and texturing tools. It comes with 3 different wheels, including 4 different wheels, including one of which is a straight-up texture. This is a spiraling wheel. It's beveled on one side, and the way you use it is you rotate that bevel into the piece where you want the spirals. Now, they also come with, it has a mini tool, and it comes with this, I don't know if you can see that sort of platform there. You can fix that platform to the tool so that you keep the spirals on the same. So it looks like that, and it's got some indexing on the inside. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see here. Where's my camera at? So there's the indexing. So you can it goes on the tool like this. And what it'll let you do is it'll let you create a consistent spiral. A friend of mine who turns thin-stemmed goblets, and he does create spiraling on his stems by using this tool. So the first thing you have to do is you have to make sure that you've got enough room between the tool rest and the piece so that the wheel can rotate freely. Because if you don't, you're going to be chewing up your tool rest. I like to not put that platform on because I don't usually generate spirals that are the same. I usually will move the tool, roll the tool as I'm creating a spiral to create a funky texture. That looks like. So I started off with it like this, and it rolled through like that to create a texture that sort of flows a little bit differently. And you can change that, including if you're going straight on with the tool, you can make it So that going straight on was this texture here. So as I roll it, I got this, and then going straight on gives you a texture that looks like that. This is a Wagner knurling tool. Again, you've got to make sure that your wheel can roll freely. This creates a texture. This has knurled teeth on it, and it creates a pattern texture that is a little bit different than these. And these you usually press right directly into the wood. And that is a texture that looks like that. This tool here is a 3-point tool, but you could use a skew. This tool is used basically just to create lines and to separate the different textures. So this again is the Wagner texturing tool. This is a Sorby tool, spiraling tool, pushed straight on. This is it rotated, and this is the Taylor Decorating Elf. These tools can all be used on the face as well, on the end grain, and we'll show that. This tool here is one of the D-Way tools. This is the D-Way Beading Tool. I don't know if you can see that. And it's presented like this, so when you sharpen it, you sharpen it across this with a card. And what it does is it lets you do beads. Now, one of the problems, if you're doing grooves, or you're doing beads, or you're doing anything repeated, it's difficult to get them all consistent. One of the things I really like about the D-Way tools is it lets you do consistent with things. For instance, not so much. I get a little bit, usually like in the top. That's an excellent question. He asked the question about, do I get a lot of tear out on it? I do. I mean, you can see there's a little bit of tear out here on the top. I was going right in. You can fix that usually with sanding. Sometimes the way they say, like this wood is very forgiving, Bradford Parrot soft. But the way they say to do this is especially on harder woods, if you're doing oak or something like that, they say to rock the tool back and forth, and that will help remove some of that tear out. Clean it up a little bit while you're doing it. So I can use these, and then I can go to my garrote and burn my grooves in. But if you've ever tried to do grooves or do burn grooves or any other features that are repeated, it's even if you're using a ruler to lay them out with, it's not always easy to get them consistent with. And one of the things I really like about the D-Way tools is they let you do things like consistent beads and consistent areas to do things like burn grooves in. You're not supposed to use those at very high speed. They say you're supposed to use them at about 500 RPM. I have done them faster, usually by omission, not paying attention. It sounds like you're destroying the tool when you do it. I haven't done that. I haven't destroyed the tool by doing that, but it seems to work much better if you're not going quite as fast. The tool seems to hold up better. Yeah, they say to go 500, 800, something like that. So you don't want to be going 2,500 RPMs. Rotating the tool or moving it through faster will change it. I don't have enough chips here, but usually what they say is to take a handful of chips and burnish it. So you do have debris. One of the things I do have here is, this is a paintbrush. This comes with the Decorating Elf. It's a paintbrush with the bristles chopped off. It is a hair brush. It is not a plastic, okay? Right? And what you do is you run it across your textures to clean them up. It burnishes. If you've got a bunch of chips under the lathe, you can use that. If you don't, this really helps. This cleans it up quite a bit. It does. They do leave a lot of debris and well, not a lot, but they do leave. There are artifacts from using the tools, and you should before I did what I did with the Sharpie or any other coloring, you should use it. You should use something like this or to burnish it off. This is Butane Torch. I'm going to try to use it on the surface of this wood to see if I can enhance these designs. These are not very expensive, and I'm doing it at a tangent angle. Not directly in it, because if I do that, then I'm burning the inside as well, and I don't want to do that. So, I don't know if that's... You can use the torch to enhance this. You don't have to use coloring or whatever. Sharpie, this shows up the patterns. Now, one of the things that the torch will also show up is it'll also show your tear out. So if you're using a softer wood, or if you're using a dry wood like box elder that tears out easily, it will show the tear out. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't. Depending on what effect you can see a little bit of it here. Depending on the effect you want, maybe that's something you want to show to get a little more rustic appeal to it. I would say they're more effective when using them on a face. You wouldn't typically use a spiraling effect, a straight spiral on face as much, but this is just a means to an end. The creativity that you create from using a texturing tool like this is entirely up to you. Maybe it works for you. Maybe you might have a need for doing that. When you're working on the face, and I'm going to go to the face next. I show these same tools on the face. When you're working on the face, you have a little more room for creativity. It shows up a little more. So I would say that they're more effective. I use them a lot on... If you look at the back of this piece here, you will see a lot of these different sorts of techniques. This is the spiraling tool here, rotated dramatically. This is also the spiraling tool here. Okay, so there's a lot of options. And I can roll it side to side. That's me using a scraper or a skew as a scraper. Okay. So let me use bowl gouge. Create a groove for the decorating elf. Okay, so this is this one here is the decorating elf, and this one here is the Sorby spiraling tool. So this is my response to your question about is it more effective on the face than on the spindle. I like this sort of thing a lot more than I like the spindle options. But that's one of the things you can do. And then you can take it and use it if you go further out, you can rotate it. You can rotate it however you want. You can spiral it the other direction if you want. Is that what you're asking? You can, and you're supposed to. The bevel is you're supposed to present the bevel into the wood. Okay, so however you present that bevel, that's how you're going to get the groove. So if I'm going in like this and it's spinning like this, then if I go in like this, it's going to spin like that. I'll show you. You would get the pattern you got from how you presented the tool to the piece. Yeah, because I don't have the little platform on it, so I'm not restricted to I can rotate this however I want. Okay, so if you just notice this here, let me use the black marker on this. By changing the presentation of the tool, I got spirals in different directions. Okay? So you have an infinite, however you rotate that tool and how you present that tool into the piece will give you an infinite variety of the spirals that you want. And the people who play with this can really get some very fascinating stuff like down in here, and it'll change. The further out you are, how far away you are from the rotation, will change how the spirals are also. You know, as I moved out, the spirals changed. As I rolled the tool, the spirals changed. So there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of possibilities for creating a large array of designs with these tools. To show how the acrylic card works, I've cut my grooves. And now what I do is I turn the lathe up, and push the card into the groove, and it burns. And it doesn't smell very good, but it's an effective technique. It's an effective technique to burn in those grooves like that. A lot of times you'll get what we call overburn, where the act of burning expands out, so you can, you'd be sanding that stuff away. It's a surface thing that's sanding away. That's what it does to the card when you use it. I'm going to add some wood burning to this. That was an acrylic sample from Home Depot. You go into the kitchen area where they've got the countertops and the veneer, and they have hundreds and thousands of them hanging on the walls. And I asked the guy there if you could have some of the extras and take a stack. They're free. Okay, this wood burner is a nibs burner. It is no longer made. They went out of business. They decided to stop making them. It's similar to a razor tip. I use razor tip accessories with my wood burner. You can use a wood burner to do all sorts of different textures. So I could add a series of lines like this. One of the gentlemen was asking about how I combine things. So you can make things where you bring several lines to a point like that. So I'm just adding lines. You can use any number of different tips. You can make your own tips. I have made my own tips. I've got ones that I've made that use the nichrome wire that have square ends and little bronze nails. Ones I've shaped. I've got ones that make spirals. This is a what's her name? What's her first name? Winton? I don't remember. Is it Bonnie? Molly. Okay. She teaches how to make these. Basically, you wrap the wire around a nail. So there's a lot of different things you can do. You can create your own tips fairly easily with a little bit of nichrome wire, and use them to create patterns. Now, like I said earlier, when I was talking about if you're going to paint, how you change, what you do, what you use, and what you spray. Now, on some of those over there, I've sprayed using paint, and that's fine. But sometimes you want to paint over your designs, and then you want to embellish them. You want to add things like liming wax or embellishing wax, or you want to add the metallic gilding paste like I did over there. So if you want to keep the grooves, then you've got to use something that soaks into the wood like a dye or a stain rather than a paint, because the paint will build up in the grooves, and then it'll make your grooves go away, and that's a bad thing. So this airbrush setup that I have here, I bought for around $100. I got it at TCP Global, which is tcpglobal.com, which sells the kits. The ones they have now have compatible airbrushes. They're around $95 or so. They also have paint and a how-to DVD. So things that weren't available when I started doing this. So I'm going to use this chestnut spirit stain. This is a British product. It is available in the U.S. through a number of different vendors. It is an alcohol-based stain. This is what they call part airbrush. I don't know the exact term. If I depress, I get air going through it. If I pull it back, I add paint. So this doesn't take a lot of paint or a lot of stain, just a few drops. Now they say that this paint, or this stain, is not perfectly black, that it's got a purple component of some kind. In the right light, you can see that. But I really like these colors. They're very good colors. And as you can see, I did those plates several years ago, so they've held up pretty well. This is a Hampshire Sheen embellishing wax. It's a wax designed to go inside the grooves. So how people are doing it, and how I've done it on the spear over there, is you put it in the grooves, you let it dry a bit, and then you burnish off any excess. This is a gilding paste. There are a bunch of different brands. This is designed to go on top of the wood. It's not going in the grooves. So how this is done, how this is applied, is you put a little thin skin of it on your finger and you very gently brush it over the top. You don't want this in the grooves. So the effects are kind of diametrically opposite to each other. One of them fills the grooves. One of them leaves the grooves the way they are. So this is what the gilding paste looks like, and I've got just a little tiny bit on my finger here. You only want the thinnest bit of skin of this stuff on your fingers, because if you don't, it'll get into the groove. So, and this is a product that works really well if once you've done the burnishing, like we were talking about earlier, because do your sanding and your burnishing before you do your texturing. This stuff works really well when you've got a good, smooth, prepped surface for it. This is the embellishing wax. It's designed to go inside the grooves, so you have to push it into the grooves. So when you're burnishing this off, you don't want to dig the stuff out of the grooves. So can you see that? How's that? Yeah. All right, so there's two different effects there of ways that once you've already cut an embellishment or a groove, you can then enhance that with either the embellishing wax. The liming wax works the same way. I've got liming wax over here if you guys want to take a look at that. Or with the gilt paste. I've used the golds and the bronze also. They look pretty cool, but the silver seems to sell better, just because of the metallic look to it all. When I'm done with the decorations, I usually use lacquer. I am using Minwax rattle can lacquer. Light coats, if you put a heavy coat on, it's going to make your stuff run, makes your paint run, makes your embellishments run, goes away, okay? Some of these pieces have 8 to 14 coats of lacquer on them. The gilt paste, I feel comfortable putting lacquer on it right away. I've gone right from putting the gilt cream or the gilt paste on right to finishing. In the sphere over there I did, one of those sections has got bronze in the holes. That's the embellishing wax, the bronze embellishing wax. I let that out of my shop for 2 days to dry, and some of that stuff dried and I had to re-put it in. And after I did, I immediately went and put lacquer on it after, so it didn't happen again. The stain that I used is an alcohol-based stain. The intrinsic dyes are water-based stains. The sphere was my experimentation. First time I got the water-based dyes, that's the result. That sphere I made solely from those water-based dyes. Okay? And the embellishing wax. I have not had a problem with it. It seals it in. Again, I'm putting a lot of coats of lacquer, a lot of light coats, okay? Everybody knows what happens when you put heavy coats on stuff, especially on paints. It runs. I'm usually doing it off the lathe. When I use the sanding sealer I use is Deft, which is a lacquer-based sanding sealer. I'm doing that on the lathe. If I'm usually on the plates, on those platters over there that I did, they've had sanding sealer on them usually twice. So I'll put sanding sealer on, a light coat of sanding sealer, sand, another light, sand up to 400 or whatever, another light coat, and start sanding at 320 up to maybe 600, and then after that, once it's been sanded, then I go start painting. So I'm not really painting. I don't want the paint or the stain or anything I put on there to raise the wood grain. I really don't want that, because that mars the effect of the piece, especially if I'm doing those leaves. Some woods take them better than others. Yeah, absolutely right. Now I have done it on some oak, and oak doesn't handle edges really well either, which is kind of interesting because oak is a hard wood. I've got red oak and white oak that I regularly turn. Okay. Oak does not handle edges well. I've tried carving on oak, and oak doesn't handle carving either. It doesn't do precise edges well. These tools are creating precise edges, and you're counting on keeping those precise edges for your pattern in the process of it. Okay, that's a sphere. It comes with a square edge cylinder, and it comes with a pear-shaped one. So when you buy it, you get 3 different, and they should just pull out. This one isn't, and you can interchange the bits really easily if you want to. I have used the cylinder one and the pear-shaped one, or the flame-shaped one, or whatever they call it, the bud, and they all work pretty good. But I use the spear more often, so I usually just leave it in here. All right, what I'm doing here is I'm using a skew, and all I did was just use it as a scraper to face off the piece. And then I put in some grooves to create an area for decoration. Now, one of the things, if you're going to be adding embellishments to a piece, one of the things to consider is your canvas. This is not just a plate, it's a canvas for what I'm doing. So when I decided what I was going to put on it, I created a canvas here, a rim, for creating the Celtic image, the Celtic braid that I wanted to. And then I defined it with the edge here and this groove here. So when you start thinking about adding embellishment to your pieces, start thinking of your piece as a canvas, whether it's a plate, whether it's a bowl and you're adding things to the rim, like this other piece here, like this piece here, okay? I decided how big to make my rim, because what I wanted to do was add these 2 grooves here on the outside like this, and then do a texture between them. So this is my canvas, is that I'm thinking about, I'm planning ahead, and it doesn't have to be where you're designing it on graph paper down to the millimeter. All you have to do is plan for what you're going to add. We all know that the plans are going to change, or could change, once you start turning. Once whatever you're doing, maybe you have a mishap and it creates a learning opportunity or design opportunity where you're going to change what you're doing. But I planned for the rim in this bowl to be this big because of the features and the textures I wanted to add to it. The same is true for this piece here. I knew that this was going to go on the lathe. I knew that I wanted this much space to put this design in. I knew it was going to go back on the lathe, and I knew that I was going to add this bowl here when I was done. So I defined it with this groove after I did the paint. I put it on the lathe, defined this groove, and I think I probably dished the bowl at that time. And then I took it back off the lathe and did this design between the edge of my canvas and this edge of my canvas. How this plate was laid out. Start thinking about how you're going to design your embellishment, how you're going to add your embellishment. Leave enough space for it. It doesn't have to stay that big. It's not going to ruin it if you have a catch and you need to change it. But leave yourself the room, leave yourself the space to put your embellishment on. Because, again, this is not specifically a turned piece of wood exactly. It is also a canvas for what you're doing, for the work you're going to be adding to it. So that's what I'm doing with this. I've said I'm going to leave, I've got a groove here that's going to be the outside of my design, and this is going to be the rim of my piece. I've got two grooves here. The first groove is going to be the inside of my design, and then I'm going to put a small bowl or something here on the inside. So before I've even started doing any sort of embellishment other than these grooves, I'm defining the space I'm going to be doing that embellishment in. Oh, that was done with the Sorby spiraling tool. You start at the middle. Things get really interesting with the Sorby spiraling tool in the middle because of how things are rotating. So the wheel itself is not rotating all that much. And as I put it in, I also rolled the tool a little bit to give me, to enhance the design, to change the design a bit. So I mentioned Nick Agar. He greatly, taking a class with him at Aramount, greatly enhanced my turning and my creativity. Nick also does a really great video on YouTube about using these spiraling tools, and I strongly recommend, if you're going to explore it, I strongly recommend looking at his video, because he does some of this stuff also and more. This is a Dremel. It's got a saber-tooth burr, a fine-tooth saber-tooth burr in it. I'm going to be using that to create a pattern on my piece. So this piece here is one I did that's very similar. It's got a sort of a crosshatch pattern to it. Basically, you do 2 grooves one way, and then you do 2 grooves 90 degrees to them. Looks like this. Now, when I'm carving, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create what we call a 3-point stance. I've got one of my hands on the tool and on the piece. I've got my other hand also on the tool and on the piece. And the third point is the bit itself. This gives me a lot of control with my tool. It helps me direct it. And a Dremel is not the most precise tool. I mean, they make motors and they make dental drills and so on that are a lot more precise. But you can get a great deal of control with any of these carving tools if you adopt a stance, a more secure, a more stable way of doing your carving. So I've got one finger on the piece and on the tool, another finger on the piece and on the tool, and then I'm and then I can do things like, this is a sanding drum. And I can create the textures with the sanding drum if I want to. And I can do things like go over the top of it. So there's a lot of things you can do with a Dremel tool or any of your other basic tools to create a texture or a pattern. So let me switch it with this other one I made that's all done already. I have 4 Dremels in my shop. 2 of them are battery powered, 2 of them are not. One of them I always have the Reciprocating Carver on it. Wecher, W-E-C-H-E-R, makes a Reciprocating Carver. I use that for doing things like taking the bottoms, the nubs off of things I parted off the lathe and stuff like that. But I have them all, they're all set up on a little sort of a workstation deal, so I can, and I usually keep that saber-tooth burr in there too, because it's very useful to clean the bottoms off of things really quickly before you do final sanding. So, but they're very useful. I have them in the shop all the time. I'm going to put this one in. It's just a little bigger with the same sort of design that's been sanded a little bit like I was showing you. This is a milk carton with a hole cut in the side. Looks like that. It's what I spray stuff in, like that. I want to spray red first, so I've got to get the black out of here and then put red in. Well, the compressor comes with it. They sell them. You're not running a lot of air pressure. Okay, so it's, you're no more than 25 psi. It's usually lower, like 20 or 15. So there's they sell a bunch of different ones. You can buy them. You can buy them separate if you want. They have most of us have air compressors in our shops. Okay, so you can probably get a regulator and get it to the pressure where you want. I want to spray red. Usually when you're using your airbrush and spraying, you start with the light colors, and you can get away with going up to progressively darker colors. Like if you spray blue and then you spray it out and then you spray black, you're usually not having any kind of issue with that. So, but when you go down, when you go from a darker color like black to something like red, then if you don't clean it out, you're going to get a lot of changed color. You're not going to get the red you want. This is DNA, denatured alcohol. I'm using it to clean my brush because I used an alcohol-based stain, If I was using standard airbrush colors, which are acrylic, thinned acrylic based in water, I would use water to clean the brush out. When I'm done for the day, I clean the brush out. I have airbrush cleaner, so I clean with whatever solvent is appropriate, and then I clean with the cleaner when I'm done. And usually I'll disassemble the airbrush and clean all the parts too. Having a clogged airbrush is no fun at all. Learning to clean the airbrush is a part of using it. It's something you do every time. If you don't, you'll clog your airbrush out. It'll be a problem. Now what I'm going to do on this is I'm going to go over it with black gesso. And then I'm going to use the Scotch-Brite You'll have to repeat that. Give me a minute till the airbrush stops because I can't hear you. I think the biggest piece of it is I can make sure I get it in most of the crooks and crannies. That's really making sure that I get coverage is a reason why I do the airbrushing. This is probably dry now, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the black gesso, and I use a paintbrush on this because you can't spray it, it's too thick. This is black gesso. You can buy this at any craft store, Joann's, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, et cetera, they sell this stuff. Anybody who has decent acrylic paints will sell a black gesso. I want something that's a little thicker, okay? Gesso is a flat color. It's a thicker paint. I mean, clearly you could use a thick acrylic paint. You could probably get away with using acrylic paint. You could do this with milk paint. I want it thick because my intention is to go over this with a Scotch-Brite pad to reveal the red underneath the black. Okay, so thick will get it on, and thick will also cover up my textures. This stuff also dries fairly quickly, but while we're waiting for it to dry, I'm going to turn the center of it out, trying to get it into the little cavities here also. So I've got not only do I have my grooves, but each of the little crevices from the texturing. So I know this is like watching paint dry, only not quite as bad. I have used India ink in coloring, okay? That works. It works on wood. It's, one of the things you want to be concerned about with things like ink, and if you're putting on a stain too heavily, is you want to make sure that you don't do something that will cause the ink or whatever you're putting on to bleed. One of the benefits of using airbrush is that you're mostly just putting on a very thin coat, very thin surface coat. So unless you're really, really using the airbrush heavily, you're not putting a lot of paint on the piece. So it's not going to soak in and start spreading. With ink wicks through the wood straws really easily. I've had issues where I was doing a decoration with ink, lightly putting an ink decoration on, and it has bled through the wood, which is, required a lot of sanding and cleanup and stuff like that. So one of the things you can do if you've decided to use ink is do some wood burning outlines of areas that you're going to use the ink on. And the reason why you do that is because the burning will seal the wood at those borders or wherever you're putting in your skew lines or whatever you're doing. You create a border that the surface paint or whatever does not migrate through. Okay, so what I've done is, so far, is that I've turned out the center, turned in my grooves a little bit, and turned off my edge. And now I'm going to take my Scotch-Brite pad, I don't do this on the lathe with the lathe running. I'm doing it by hand so I can control what I've got, what's happening. It's starting to bring out, it's starting to take the black off and expose the red underneath, just like this piece here, very similar to how this piece was done. So any texture you create on a piece like this using this technique, and I don't know how long I've taken to do this with all the talking, 15, 20 minutes or whatever, but you get an idea about how you can create a very interesting look. I mean, this would work great with turquoise behind black. It would work great with white behind a dark blue. Any colors you want. The technique works really well. And you can, the textures that you create are limitless. So you could, anything you want. One of the things that I do is I do a sort of a spiral with the Dremel. You could do that on that piece with the little spirals. It's similar a little bit to this part here. Let me see if I can show that. There we go. This bit here was done with a Dremel. Okay. So all I did was create the little divots, and then spray put the black on it, and then the black stain on there from that little box, and then used dry brushing red and dry brushing yellow and dry brushing white on it. So there's just, it doesn't take a lot to really enhance a texture like this or like that or anything else you might be doing that can really bring out the piece like that. This sphere is made from Bradford pear. It's hollow. The things inside are a few loose nuts and washers that were in my workshop. It is glued shut. So each of the textures and most of the painting came out of the intrinsic color box. So this was done with a Dremel and 3 different spear bits, and I did all the holes. Basically what I did is once I cut the lines, okay, so one of these lines is the line where the spear was made as a box, okay? So one of the lines is where the box is joined, is glued together. So then what I did is I rotated it 90 degrees in the lathe to make the other 2 lines, and I used the little doohickey with the 2x4 handles and the picture hanging wire to burn the lines, okay? So then what I drew with pencil is I drew center lines. Apex to center, vertex to center, and then I did all of the patterns based on those based on those lining lines, because it gives you the center and then the ones around it, and this is all done with a Dremel with a spear bit, 2 different spears, and then the stain, and then little bits of black paint in the bottom. This one was done with the Dremel. As I said before, I actually used these rotary chisels. One of them has a round profile, but it was used in the Dremel, and you just go zip, 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 and then it's got the black stain, and then red acrylic paint, dry brush, yellow and white. This one was done. You know what? I should show that technique. I will in a minute. This was done with the Dremel and the used up stone, and you just basically pushed it in to create the holes in the patterns, and you can see where I was following the lines drawn. And then it was filled with, I first did it with the sky blue and then it was filled with the bronze embellishing wax from the Hampshire Sheen embellishing wax. This one was done with the wood burner. It was all done with the skew. It was all done freehand. Once the three were drawn around the center, and then the other lines were all drawn around that. Actually, the shadowing was not done with the skew. It was done with the spade bit on the wood burner. And then I gave it all the honey color, honey stain, and then there's a little bit of red inside each flower. This one was done with each petal. This one was done with the wood burner skew, all from the center. Basically, you start deep and slow and move faster and pull it up as you move to the center. So you get a thinner line, and you want to make sure that you pull it up before you get to the absolute center. And then this was just the red, the ruby from the box in there. This was also done with the wood burner. The spirals were done. I did big ones, and then I did the one, and then I halved the distance between each of them to try and keep them regular. And then the embellishing wax is the silver embellishing wax, and the blue is the sky blue. Let's see. This one was also done with the wood burner. It's got the earth and the ruby, and there's a little bit of purple in there as well. This one was just done with the skew tip, just pulling them away one at a time. And this one was done with the diamond bit, with the Dremel. And it's a very small diamond sphere, and you just make all the cavities, and then you put the black on, and then you put the green paint in the little cavities. The wood burn lines are separating the colors. The wood burn lines, they're separating the colors. I'm applying the colors with a brush. Yep, and if you look really, really closely, there's a few places where you could see where I went where I went outside the lines. Thank you.